All right, this video is an introduction to variables. On Blackboard, I'm basically covering in this video just up to the first two bullet points here. So I just want to introduce the idea of variables. Some of you may be familiar, some of you aren't. So what is a variable? A variable is something that can hold a value. So I'm going to back up before I explain further and talk about what kinds of variables we're going to be using. All right. So in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about floats, which are numbers which have decimals, ints, which are whole numbers, char, which is a simple character. And these three kinds of variables, float, int, and char, are what are known as primitives. That's not really important that you remember that, but what that simply means is it can only hold one thing. That'll make more sense here in a minute. But the reason I even pointed out is because as opposed to if I use float, char, or int, you can see they're all lowercase. But then I threw in another type here, which is called string, and you'll see it's capitalized. String can hold a string of characters, like a word or a phrase. And the reason string is capitalized is because it is not a primitive. It can hold more than one thing. So these are a lot of characters. Again, that's not important, but as you're starting to learn this stuff, you may get confused. Like, why is string capitalized and these others aren't? So there actually is a reason behind that. Okay, so a variable is something that holds a value. Okay, so they're going to be formatted like this. The type name, what that means is you have to tell the computer what kind of content your variable is. So for example, if I say float, my computer is going to expect a number with a decimal. If I say char, my computer knows to expect a character. All right, so you have to start by telling it the type. Now, depending on what other languages you've used, if any, for example, back in ActionScript, we used to have to do something like this. We used to have to say var, telling the computer it was a variable. You don't have to do that in processing. You just simply have to say what the content is, all right? And then you give it a name. Now, notice here, this is, on my computer, it's orange. It's probably orange on your computer too. But this means that the computer, that's a keyword. So the computer knows what an int is. You don't have to explain what an int or a float is to processing because it already knows. Okay, this name here, however, is black. That's the name that you pick for it. So I could call this anything I wanted to. I could call it Fred. Fred doesn't make sense. We're going to use something that makes sense. So I just called it my number. That's that's seen in a lot of languages. Some people like to use super short variable names like that. Personally, I don't like those because if you're handing off your code to somebody else and it's not immediately apparent what that is, that's going to be confusing and it's going to make it hard to read. So give it a short name. Notice here I'm using something called camel case, so there's no spaces, right? In fact, if you see when I did that, it threw an error down here. So we don't want any spaces. And with camel case, we start with lowercase, and then the second word is uppercase. And if there were a third word here, it would start with uppercase as well. All right. And that's how I want you to format your code in here. Now the next thing is the value. So here I said, hey, processing, I'm gonna make an int. I'm gonna call it my number, and then I'm gonna tell you what it's equal to. Here I'm gonna say it's 20. All right. Here I've got a float. I've called it my decimal, and I've said it's equal to 2.71. Here I said, hey, I'm gonna use a char, which is a character. I'm calling it my initial, and it's equal to, and notice here I have to have a single parenthesis around this. I think you can actually use a double, like a regular quotation mark. Pretty sure. Try that and see. Some languages well, I'll try it. Some languages let you do that and some don't. Yep, it's happy, so I could use that too. And down here I've said string, and I've called it my name equals, and notice here in quotation mark, there's my name, okay? Now the cool thing about this and why you want to use variables, you might say, why can, I'm gonna draw a circle. Let's go down here. So I could draw a circle this way like we did before. And I'm gonna say, whoops, the x is 10, the y is 10, the width is 200, or the width and the height is 300. All right, so I could write this like this. However, if I was using, let's say I wanted to draw a number of circles that were 200 by 300. If I decided, let's say I had 5 of these, even 3 of these, and they're all at different locations. Oops. Oops, let me do it this way. Let's run my code here. Aha! See what I said? I wasn't sure if it would let me use a single quotation mark or double. I can't use a double. It threw me an error there. That's why it's good to read those errors. All right, so let's try it again. Now it's happy. Okay, so here I've got my circles. I can't really see them because they're one on top of one another. So let me come in here and change them. Let's do this. How big is my stage? There we go. All right, so this circle, actually, let me comment out that circle so we don't see it at the moment. And I'm gonna make my stage a little wider here so we can see what I'm doing. That's better. Whoops, not that number. Okay, here we go. So I've got 3 circles on my stage here. All right, now let's say I was doing a bunch of those, and let's say I just wanted to change how tall they were. Now let's say I had these also strung out throughout my code, and I had, if I wanted to change like this number right here, just the width of my circle, I would have to go find that in every bit of my code and change it. That's a pain. So if I've used a variable, up here I've got an integer and I've called it circle width and I've said it's 100. I can simply, let me come in here and just change my width. If I can type. Which apparently I can't do. I'm just going to copy and paste that. Okay, now here are my circles. Let's say I don't like that. I want to change them. Now all I have to do, instead of change every single instance of this, I just come up to where it says circle width and I'm going to say, hey, I want them all 20 now. And wherever that circle width is, it's going to change these to 20. And I can do the same thing with the height. As long as these numbers are the same in all circumstances, I can just change them in the one place at the top. Did I spell that right? Yes. And there's some super cool things we can do with this, which I'll get into in the next video. Let me change this. I'm going to make it a true circle. I'm going to change this up here to 20 now. Look, and it changed all my circles for me. So it's a very efficient way of working. And the book goes into, when you should use them, when you shouldn't. I almost always use variables. Unless something's only going to be used one time, I use a variable. Okay, so we talked about camel case, using names that make sense. You have to be careful about naming your variable. So let's say int. I want to declare an int here, and I want it to be, I'm going to call it width. See how that turned orange when I typed it? That means that word is already a variable or a keyword in processing, so you can't use it. You could change it and call it something like circle width. All right. The key to variables, as I said before, but I'm going to repeat it, have them make sense. Again, I see a lot of code people grab from the internet, and it's something like, and that's just super hard for anybody else to understand. I don't know what C means. So try to make it a name which makes sense. All right. So in the next little video, I'm going to talk about some fun things we can do with variables, and there's a lot of really powerful things that can happen because of that. All right.